The Batman is the version of the Dark Knight we've always wanted. This is Nerdist Now. We live in a rarefied era as Batman fans. Every few years we get a new Batman, a new adventure in the streets of Gotham City, and sometimes a new Gotham City. And the character, though rigid in his moral code, hopefully, is incredibly malleable in terms of adaptations. Mega campy or shockingly realistic, Batman can fit any style. But that also means everyone has their own platonic ideal of a Batman story, depiction, and aesthetic. Though I've definitely enjoyed most movies that have featured the Caped Crusader, my specific favorite take on the character has never hit the big screen. Until now. Matt Reeves' The Batman is, for me, the very best Batman movie ever made. Now I know that is a big, bold statement. For most, Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight is number one with several bullets. That's a great movie, no question. But for all its visual prowess, I don't think it got the characters right. That series tries to make Batman realistic to a fault, foregoing all but the most necessary and often most preposterous of fantastical elements. Reeves' take on Gotham City is grounded and gritty, but still rooted firmly in comic book mentality. And chiefly, for me, it's an actual detective plot. Finally, we get the world's greatest detective living up to that title on film. Unless you count that bullet casing scene from The Dark Knight. Like, what was the deal with that? The Batman also takes heavy influence from horror. It's not merely that Batman as a character uses fear the way he has since his inception. The movie itself feels like a crime horror story, like Fincher's Seven or, very pointedly, Zodiac. It's intense and thrilling, but also suspenseful in a way I had not expected. Now, before we get into the review of the film, just want to throw out the obligatory spoiler warning, even though we're holding back spoilers in this video as much as possible. So for anyone who wants to go into this film completely blind, make like this guy and go take a little nap. We open with Bruce Wayne, Robert Pattinson, having donned the Batman persona for 2 years. 2 years patrolling the streets of Gotham, but feeling like he has hardly made a difference. At least not a positive one. On Halloween night, someone calling themselves the Riddler, played by Paul Dano, murders a very prominent Gothamite. He leaves a message for the Batman, and Lieutenant Jim Gordon, played by Jeffrey Wright, who is the vigilante's lone supporter on the GCPD, brings in the mysterious crime fighter for help. As clues turn up and more prominent members of Gotham's high society end up dead, Batman begins to unravel a seedy plot involving the rich and powerful on both sides of the law. During his investigation, he crosses paths with Selina Kyle, played by Zoe Kravitz, a petty thief and cocktail waitress at the Iceberg Lounge. The Iceberg's owner, the mob enforcer The Penguin, played by an unrecognizable Colin Farrell, works for mob boss Carmine Falcone, and both know more than they let on. The Riddler's motives have something to do with all of these people and with Bruce Wayne and his slain parents, but what? Go see the movie, I'm not gonna tell you. The Batman is the first film that really makes Gotham City feel like a lived-in city collapsing under its own corruption. The denizens of the city in the comics pass in and out of Batman's purview as he, Gordon, and Selina try to get to the bottom of the Riddler's terrifying machinations. To Matt Reeves and co-writer Peter Craig's credit, though the movie is very long at nearly 3 hours, but the story and characters are strong enough to support its considerable weight. The story goes many places, but it all feels necessary. This certainly isn't just a comic book writ large. This version of Gotham City is a vibe unto itself. This is maybe the gloomiest version we've ever seen, and that is truly saying something. But unlike the Tim Burton movies, it still feels like a real place. Unless you do live in a city that has buildings held up by giant statues of men. Cinematographer Greg Fraser makes the darkness in the heart of the city seep out into every frame. If not for the bright contrasts of fire or sunlight, you might think Gotham is a city without hope. But for all the movie's brutality, the story is about finding hope where you can, even in the face of oppressive badness. Whenever a new actor takes over the role of Batman, their ability to pull it off is front and center in people's minds. Robert Pattinson's take on Batman is unique among the screen versions. This isn't a Bruce Wayne who pretends to be a playboy to cover up his nocturnal activities. This is a Bruce who is a complete recluse, fully devoted to the ideal of his Batman project, a self-proclaimed agent of vengeance with no other thought in mind. As such, he's the first version of the character who feels more himself as Batman than Bruce. He seems uncomfortable in any clothes that aren't the Batsuit or his slovenly disguise for reconnaissance. He emotes through the mask, which is truly a feat. Kravitz and Wright are wonderful in their takes on Catwoman and Gordon, respectively. They end up as Batman's two most trusted allies in this particular war. Though they've had a romance in both Batman Returns and The Dark Knight Rises, the Batman-Catwoman would-be relationship here feels the most well-rounded. Kravitz and Pattinson have bananas good chemistry, which I absolutely did not expect. But what is Batman without his villains? These run the gamut. Farrell is essentially doing a Robert De Niro impression the entire time underneath his heavy makeup. It's silly, but it's also somewhat endearing after a while. His Penguin is the closest the movie has to a true comic relief, yet he still feels incredibly dangerous. Dano as the Riddler is nothing short of terrifying. His screen time is limited, especially early on, but this only gives his appearances and especially his distorted vocal performance a great deal of heft. Making the Riddler akin to the Zodiac Killer is definitely a choice, but it pays off in interesting ways. Once we learn the true breadth of his scheme, it's a real shock and adds a different kind of horror to the already scary portrayal. If the movie has one aspect that felt underdeveloped to me, it's the relationship of Bruce to his faithful butler Alfred Pennyworth, played by Venom 2 director Andy Serkis. He also did some acting before that. Serkis is excellent, a sort of Guy Ritchie take on the manservant father figure, but I could have used a lot more of it. I've already gone on and on, but suffice to say, I absolutely loved The Batman. This isn't just a new take on a popular comic book character, it's a fully realized vision for a world, one like we've never gotten before. Reeves has already said he'd love to do his grounded take on more fantastical villains like Mr. Freeze or Clayface, and boy am I here for it. This movie is smart and sexy and scary in equal measure, and Michael Giacchino's driving score feels as much like a Baroque piano concerto as it does a superhero theme. This isn't a slavish adherence to comic book lore by any stretch. More, it keeps the most important elements of who these characters are and takes them in their own direction. Batman uses his brain as much as his brawn, and even when he's knocking 7 bells out of thugs, the compassion and innate heroism rings true. He's not an authoritarian power fantasy, he's a damaged individual trying to make a difference in a terrible world. One man standing up for what's right. That's the most Batman thing there is. We give The Batman 4.5 out of 5. But tell us, what do you think? How excited are you for The Batman? What's your favorite Batman movie? And what villain would you like to see in a possible sequel? Let us know in the comments below, and for more of our Batman Week celebration, head on over to Nerdist.com.